Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 37th chapter in the book of Job. This is the sixth and final chapter of Elihu, the final human discourse. After this, Yahweh condescends in the form of a whirlwind to settle the debate, but in between Job and the back and forth, the rounds between him and his three misleadingly named comforts, in between Job's final wind, we hear an equally lengthy, as measured by chapters, discourse from Elihu. We hear of 4 speeches and 6 chapters, and so the fourth and final one really begins in the 36th, and beginning in the 22nd verse, the tone takes an abrupt transition to just the doxological praise and hymn and witness of just his majesty, his grandeur, his transcendence, his beyondness, and his incomprehensibility. Now, the fact that we cannot know everything we would like to know, and that everything that there is to know is not meant for us to know, is necessary for faith, because when we allow our desire for greater understanding to supersede our trust in his provision, then that's when we are on a dangerous detour. But there is a structure of it beginning in the 27th verse. He has a structure that lasts all the way up until the 18th verse of the chapter we're going to cover today, each of which follows a season. So within the seasons, which in the naturally observable cycles of weather and just phenomenon that constitute seasons, we have a visible witness of his grandeur and his majesty. Now we should look for the fingerprint, just the beauty every time we see beauty on the earth, we have to thank God, because that is just a testament and witness of what he can do. And in the Hebrew or the ancient Palestinians and those in the adjacent territory, remember Job is of Edomite, and his comforters are of Edomite descent primarily, although we're not entirely sure the town from which Elihu hails from. It could have been northeast of Arabia or southeast of the Jordan. But in any case, that their fall would have relied heavily upon rains. There were rainfalls that were absolutely necessary, and there were spring falls, so their land is a little different than the northeast of the United States of America, where I'm filming this. So he closes the 36th chapter with just describing lightning as a voice in a form of judgment from him, and its noise, and his heart trembles in the first verse of the 37th chapter. Second verse, listen to the trembling of his voice and the sound that comes from his mouth. The listen is pluralized. Now he addresses Job, indicated individually in the first verse we're going to take off in the lesson itself today, 14th verse. So he's telling everyone around, not only Job's comforters, but also Elihu was himself part of an audience of spectators who alone had something to add. He had his own input to say, and he's just moved by this compulsion and full of pent-up words, but he also claims to speak, that God speaks to him and speaks through him. So one who has been visited by the voice, you would know the folly of not paying attention when he speaks. And he does speak to me most often in a gentle whisper of the Spirit, a barely imperceptible voice, but he is also majesty, and he does display his might by speaking through the thunder. Verse 5 concludes his section on the fall season. That's when and we also have a visible witness of the Creator, and also an invisible witness of the resurrection. In the fall, the leaves die. In winter, they are buried. And in spring, they bloom again. Resurrection right there. But verse 5, El thunders wondrously with his voice, doing great deeds which we do not understand. For he says to the snow, be on the earth, and also to the gentle rain, in the heavy rain of his strength. So in the 6th verse, he transitions into the winter, but before that he says, just the majesty and the beauty of this voice, and just all the things that he is doing in the universe right now, all the miracles that are occurring across the cosmos. We have no idea of all the good that he is doing right now, because there could be life forms on other planets. We're not entirely sure of that, but we are the crown glory of his creation in any case. But the element of incomprehensibility does necessitate faith, because when we allowed our desire for greater knowledge to supersede our trust in him, then we are on a dangerous decline. But the elements are at his command, so the snow snows because he tells it to do so. They are at his beck and call, and nature does not resist, does not rebel, does not disobey the orders. Only man does that. But the gentle rain and the heavy rain, sometimes it's barely, you can walk through the rain without a raincoat or an umbrella. Other times it's monsoon, heavy rains that is also of his strength. So the gentle rain would be a sign of his goodness, but the monsoon would be a reminder that he is in control and he is all powerful. Verse 10, this is the concluding one of the winter section. By the breath of El, ice is given, and the expanse of water becomes solid. Ice and snow are elements which proliferate and abound in the season of winter. That's when it is coldest. So the coldest condensation is not rain, but snow. And ice is what happens when water combines with snow. And this is unique in that the reason that ice floats on water. Now, everything has a liquid, a gaseous, and a solid formation, but the uniqueness of water is that it is actually lighter than itself in its solidified form than it is in its liquid form. So that's how the ice comes to be, and just the mind-blowing, just the laws of physics are truly mind-blowing to behold, and they do point to his omniscience, the omniscience of the architect who could even conceive and put in motion what we take for granted and do not see his goodness in as a matter of course is just beyond. You can spend your rest of your lifetime studying it scientifically and still not know all there is to know. He also loads the thick clouds with moisture. He scatters his bright clouds. Clouds are the evaporated condensation, so when water comes to the earth, it evaporates in gaseous form and goes to the sky, and then it pours down and replenishes itself right then. But the clouds are strategically distributed at his express command and his almighty sovereignty. They are at his beck and call, and the ones that are going to rain, but he's going to strategically distribute it so that the places on the earth can get rain, not just one. And they swirl about, being turned by his guidance, and do whatever he commands them on the face of the earthly world. Nature is a model for lack of resistance. They do not resist, they do not rebel, they cannot disobey, they have no minds to think of, so our minds and our will and our agency is what gets us in the way from perfectly obeying and performing the function that is his will for us. But nature doesn't suffer from that problem. Even animals, they cannot be held morally accountable because they have no moral agency. He causes it to come, whether as a rod or for his land, for kindness. So from the same hand is the source of blessings and punishments. He can send the rain to make the crop grow, or he also send a monsoon, and he could send lightning. Now, lightning would have been interpreted by Old Covenant Jews familiar with their history as a sure sign that God was on their side, and the pagan superstitious Gentile nations would have interpreted it differently. They would assign it as a sign of judgment, at least when they were up against the Israelites. Verse 14, lesson itself. Listen to this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wonders of El. The listen is pluralized in the second verse. We already qualified that. Here it is directed to an individual by the name of Job, the human protagonist of this book. His struggle and his dilemma is what all these wise, righteous men are trying to make sense of. So the book of Job belongs in the genre and category of a theodicy, which attempts to explore or explain the suffering of the righteous, the relationship of suffering and righteousness. Why do bad things happen to good people, and why do good things happen to bad people? There are no easy answers to these questions, and that's the challenge of wisdom literature. It's more ask-oriented than answer-oriented, so there's something more discomforting in reading the questions to which there are no easy answers to the moral absolutes in the law and the certainty of prophecy in the prophets. But to behold all that there is to behold just demands an atmosphere of silence and stillness and calm and just undistracted focus on our path, on our behalfs, to consider the wonders of you should be having solitary time with him alone every day and thinking on who he is and what he does and just all these wonders that he performs, the number of which we know not even a fraction of, and just, have him as an object of study, an object of adoration, and an object of worship. Do you know when Eloah placed them and caused the lightnings of his cloud to shine? This is somewhat similar to Yahweh's argument to Job himself. He argues from the vantage point of might is right, so because his mind conceived all the laws in physics, and Job cannot explain it, he was not there when he laid the foundation of the earth. So he argues that if you do not know the physical operations and the motions of my universe, who are you to question my moral justice? Elihu does, have an argument that is consistent with what we hear from Yahweh. Just our inability to fathom or know everything there is to know disqualifies us from being God or questioning his will, his wisdom, or his judgment, or his justice. Do you know the balancing of the clouds, the wonders of the one perfect in knowledge? The balancing of the clouds, now I earlier described them as being strategically distributed to all across the earth, but within each cloud is a balance of elements that prevents it from falling from the sky and just all these things. It is held in motion by gravity without falling to the earth. But the one perfect in knowledge, Elihu, was a brash, confident young man who claimed to speak for the one who was perfect in knowledge as recently as the 36th chapter. Probably we don't have the ability to look right now, but so he claims an intimacy and a connection and a communication with him that qualifies him to offer valid insight on the incomprehensible mystery, the enigma wrapped in a riddle that is Elohim. Why are your garments hot when the earth is stilled from the south? This, all the way up until the 18th verse, around the 17th, is the season of summer that he is speaking of. So in summer, now if any one of these seasons were to not do what it is designed to do, life on earth as we know it would cease to exist. So these are all necessary. We are at the mercy, and the physical life that we have is an endowment from things like the rise of the sun, the fall of the rain, the thundering for his providential purposes, which we cannot engage or even scratch the surface of. Did you with him spread out the clouds, strong as a hard mirror? Job is a mortal, finite, flawed, imperfect being. That just means he's human, and that is to say that he is not God. No, God is human. No, every human within even the humblest of saint is this latent God complex, which manifests itself. If you are a control freak, that is your inability to submit to God. So you have a God complex. But the most remarkable thing about the God that we worship is that humanity aspires to divinity. He humbled himself to become human in the flesh. The Word became flesh and pitched his tent among men. And while he was here, he endured every trial, every temptation. And he was born without sin, lived without sin, and died without sin. And I think one of the most remarkable things about him is when you tore him to the cross, he was flesh and blood. So he certainly felt the pain. That was not an illusion or a phantom or a mirage, as some of the Gnostics impiously imagined. But when they were nailing into his hands, and when he was hung up there, he said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what you do." Could you do that? Could you forgive someone if they were nailing your hands and hanging you to a cross for something you know you didn't do to deserve? That is, but more to the point of the passage itself, the hard mirror that is alternately translated as bronze and all that stuff. So this goes into ancient Near Eastern. There are pagan parallels present here, but we do not have an exhaustive knowledge of that stuff. So moving on. Teach us what we should say to him. We do not put in order because of darkness. What would we say to him? Job, in an earlier presumptuous phase, or in the 9th chapter, I believe, he says that he would be tongue-tied at the occasion, and he is correct in his initial statement, because once he comes, all he can do is confess his unworthiness, his ignorance, and just bow and worship before the presence of the Almighty, who did vindicate him. But he's what would you say if you had the if he was in this, if he just came down from the sky right now and made himself known to you? There are no easy answers to the question, and the normative experience would be the awareness of the dichotomy between his sacredness and your sinfulness. And, what did Isaiah say? Woe unto me, a man of unclean lips. So, we can prepare for what we would say to him, and we will have to prepare for how we're going to answer him at the judgment. If he says, I'm not saying he will say this, but if the process is like this, why should I let you in? The correct answer is not anything that I have done, but what the Son did for me. So he be told that I would speak. Would any man ask to be swallowed up? Swallowed up would have been the punishment. So speaking presumptuously, if you were to present your petition to the head of state of any nation, you would prepare. But the author of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, in the 5th chapter of that book, bemoans the carelessness which with the Median worshiper approaches the Almighty at the temple. They are making rash vows and all these things, so they do deserve punishment. But there is nothing that we can tell him whenever he asks us a question. The sentence that reads, the question is, should he be told that I would speak? But the what would you say in such a... There's no item of information that we can add to an already omniscient being. For him to not know everything there is to know already in advance before the fact would be an admission that he is less than omniscient. So there is nothing we can tell him. And whenever he asks us a question, it is not because he needs the information. It is always to test us. So pay attention to that whenever he does speak to men in the Bible, the questions he asks them. He already knows the answers. But the question is, will they pass the test? And now they shall not look on the light that is bright behind the clouds, and when the wind has passed and cleared them. So this physical reference, these physical allusions, the lightness that is bright beyond the clouds, that would have been, the sun, but it also would have been an allusion to the throne. We also read the mountain in other translations. So the mountain of Yahweh is not a literal mountain. It is his heavenly throne room upon which he is seated, firmly vested, telling the clouds where to rain, the thunder where to thunder, the sun to rise, the rain to pour, the darkness to make it night. He is in command and control of all these things. So when we look to these items in nature, we should find him by looking for the Creator who is revealed in his creation. It takes the eyes of sight, not the eyes of sight, but the eyes of faith to have this awareness. So it could be as simple as, a beautiful flower in the neighborhood. That is a sign of God and just his beauty and his awesomeness and his majesty and his might and his creative prowess. No human artist can even pretend to compare to the work of his hands, the beauty and everything else. What did the Savior say in the Sermon on the Mount, 6th chapter? Look at the robes of Solomon, then look at the lilies of the field. I tell you, Solomon was never so magnificently adorned as these. From the golden north it comes with Eloha, is awesome excellency. The excellency belongs to him. It goes wherever he goes because he is excellent. Everything he does is excellent, and he is intrinsically excellent. So he is able to perform any task, just the machinations of the operation of keeping the universe in perfect equilibrium, the sun and the galaxies spinning at the same rate that they should be spinning. That is just a testament to his excellency. So we have, whether we look to the north, the south, the east, or the west, we have signs that testify of his excellency. The ability to perform superfluously is a mark of his. So there is no challenge too great for him to do. He can do all things. With man, things are impossible, but with him, nothing is impossible. Luke 18:27 and 137. The Almighty, we have not found him out. He is exalted in power and justice and great in righteousness. He does not oppress. The incomprehensible mystery that every pilgrim seeks is the Almighty, and none of us can claim a perfect knowledge of him. He ultimately has to be grasped by faith, yet when your faith is strong enough, you won't say, I think, I hope. You'll say, I know. So what we do know of him, now we do not know everything there is to know of him. He is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, cloaked in mystery, and just showered with paradox. But we do know that he is supreme, he is almighty, he is sovereign, he is omnipotent, he is exalted in power and justice, and he is a righteous being, so, and a just being, intrinsically so. That means everything he thinks and everything he acts and everything he wills is connected to his intrinsic justice and his righteousness, and he does not oppress. Man does oppress. Man has abused the agencies. We've created this hierarchical food chain within our species, even though we domesticated all the beasts. The one beast we cannot domesticate is man, and look at the way of the world and the oppression. That is not God's responsibility. We have marred the pristine creative designs with our sin rebellion. Therefore men revere him. He does not regard any who are wise in heart. All we can do with this knowledge and awareness is just fear him, revere him, respect him, adore him, worship him, pray to him, do all the things that we have to do that are conducive to pious living. But, we cannot approach him as we are. And if we are wise in our own hearts, then we will not access the wisdom that comes from him. So the only wisdom that matters is the wisdom that emanates from him. The carnal wisdom and the worldly wisdom, there is such a thing. But true wisdom is faith. Is defined by faith, and faith is rooted in wisdom. What do we read in James 5th chapter of his first verse? If any of you need wisdom, ask and seek. And this is one of the prayers that knock and ye shall be opened, ask and ye shall receive. This is commensurate with his will for us. But if we are wise in our hearts, we will not be in the practice of prayer. What do we read in Isaiah's 5th chapter? One of the woes he pronounces those are those who are wise in their own eyes. And we can also read Proverbs 3:7, for the dangerous folly of presuming to be wise apart from Yahweh. And we're going to hear from him in the 38th chapter. We'll pick this up soon. This is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.